Yeah, what a great crowd. It's so nice to see somebody here.
Are you kidding? I've been hearing all day, and I've been looking at cosplay out here. It's fabulous. Everyone's so in the spirit of Comic-Con. You gotta love it. So here's how this is going to work, you guys. Feel free. You'll see microphones on either side of the stage in the aisles there. That's where you want to queue up if you want to ask a question. And I'll literally just ping pong back and forth. I have some questions of my own. What are you up to these days, by the way? What are you working on?
Well, I'm up in Portland. Yeah, this is kind of it for me. No, actually, there's a movie called You're Not You with Emmy Rossum and Hilary Swank coming out October 10th. There's a movie with Kevin Sorbo called Gallows Road that should be coming out soon. And if you go on IMDb, there's a few, probably about 5 films in the can. Dean Cain and I did a movie called My Ex Christmas. We shot a few months back, and I'm working on Hot in Cleveland next week with Betty White and those guys, and it'll be fun. And I'm working on a show called Grace and Kelly with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, so I'll be recurring on that. And there's a show called Scorpion that I'll be doing a recurring on. So I just stay busy. I do, now I go out and do some public speaking. It's nice to sort of go into certain communities, or just go out and talk to people, you know, and sort of tell my story, and that's kind of the most fun thing I'm doing right now. I'll be speaking in Washington, D.C. Next week, next Thursday. I'll be on a panel to discuss 150 years after slavery. So it should be interesting. And so I basically just sort of go around and meet people and smile and take pictures and hold babies and kiss a lot of babies. Hug a lot of women, you know, it's kind of cool. So.
You mentioned that you get out there and you tell your story. And just briefly, you met a friend of mine backstage, and I had heard him say something earlier. He said, what an inspiration you were to him growing up, because as an African American, you were a character who did not have to die on the big screen. And right? Oh, a really long way there. A little bit about that before I turn it over to all these people lined up with their questions.
Well, I think it was saying that it was one of the first black characters that the audience saw the world of the movie through. Winston was sort of the everyman guy, and these other guys were scientists, and he was a little bit zany, a little bit crazy, and so people kind of related to Winston, not because he was black, but just because he was a guy sort of doing what guys do. You know, there's a steady paycheck in and out, you know. So it was, when the movie came out, I would go around to schools and I'd meet a lot of little kids. But the interesting thing for me was kids would always say, well, where does Winston go? And in the very beginning, it was always kind of weird to me. It was kind of an odd question, but it would come up a lot. And the reason was the Winston character didn't get as developed as some of the other characters. So we knew that the Bill Murray character was this sort of kind of zany, parapsychologist who, did game shows and all that. And we saw Danny in his store and Harold in his lab. But we didn't know Winston would sort of be there and then Winston would disappear. And does Winston have a family? What does Winston do? And I thought that was sort of very interesting. But and I've said many times, Ghostbusters is probably the most fun I've had making any movie. The guys are amazing. We laughed a lot. It was really great. But it was also the most difficult in a lot of ways. I think primarily because of the studio's approach to the Winston character and wanting him to be a part of it, but not really wanting him to be a complete part of it. And they hate it when I say that, but that's how I saw it. I'm like, if you really hate it, you would have put me on the 30th anniversary poster. So, but, and and I don't say that with any kind of malice or anything, because I'm so thankful to have been a part of that franchise, to be a part of that franchise, and to have played that character. I've done a lot of movies, and some have been successful, but Ghostbusters is something that's very, very dear to me. So you asked me a question, I gave you like 20 minutes, I know. But,
No, we got time, and it's actually a really great answer, and it's something that I wanted to get into before we turn it over, because there's so many people queued up. Go ahead, we'll start on this side.
He was standing there longer.
Look at you, dog. What a nice man you are. Go ahead.
Hello. Let me preface this question by saying The Crow was one of the best movies of all time.
oh, thank you, yeah.
It's on my top 10. What are your thoughts on being a part of this movie and playing Sergeant Albrecht, and what was your relationship with Brandon Lee?
Well, you know, yeah, I knew Brandon for about 8 years before we made the movie. He grew up with Miguel Ferrer. Miguel and I was doing a television show back in 80-something, 88, 87, 88, something like that. It was called Broken Bandit. We were shooting up in Vancouver. And Brandon was coming back from China, and I met him there. We spent a couple weeks sort of hanging out a little bit together. So I knew him. That was about 8 years before we did The Crow. And Brandon was a sweet guy. He was just a nice kid, you know. When you get to be my age, everybody's a kid. You know, old people come up and say, I grew up watching you. And I'm like, wow, how old are you? I mean, it's like, but Brandon was a sweet guy. And when we made the movie, he wanted me to be in the movie. And I'm sure he was responsible for my having been chosen to play the part. I saw Albrecht as a guy who was going through a lot of sort of life changes that I personally was going through. And he was very specific to that story. And so when the accident happened, it was just, I don't know, I don't even have words to describe it. Because Brandon was one of those actors who was so inclusive, and so when we weren't shooting, you know, people hung out together. That didn't happen a lot on film. And I think Rochelle, who played the little girl, it was really traumatizing to her because Brandon was so close to everybody. So I'm very happy that that movie turned out to be a good movie, and that because it was an awful have been a bad movie. I think Brandon would have been proud of the movie. I'm very proud of the movie. My kids grew up loving Ghostbusters, but The Crow is, you know, one of those movies that they still love, you know, in a very different way. And so to answer it, I'm very honored to be a part of it. It breaks my heart what happened. I still don't understand how that can happen. A lot of people come up and they say they offer their condolences because of Harold Ramis' recent passing. And Harold was a friend, and Harold was a good guy. And Harold was a guy who was always down to earth, and you could, you know, I mean, I could talk to Harold about anything, and a lot of the stuff that the studio was doing to kind of push Winston to the background, Harold was always the guy I could go and talk to. But Harold was 69, and he had a great life, and he had a great career, and he did some great work. But with Brandon, he was just coming into his own, and he was so young, and he had so much promise. And so, you know, it's a little bit different. I mean, Brandon, I really, but I feel very blessed to have had them in my life, you know, but, you know, trying to understand the universe and how things work, yeah, so.
Thank you, you're awesome.
Thank you.